So it flooded, and you might hear the creek. I could probably just show you. Yeah. So it flooded down there. Lots of rain. And here's my backyard. I got a fire pit, trampoline. Oh, I did a front flip yesterday. Yeah. So this wasn't crooked the other day. Like, that might look like that's crooked, but it's just an optical illusion. But if I just get these lines kind of parallel, there we go. Well, there's the intro. Okay. So, what is the goal of Minerval Arts, and why is it named that way, and what's the process? So, um, I was on Facebook and Twitter, and there was nothing meaningful. And when I tried to engage with people on Facebook, these are people I went to school with, high school, they would get very upset as I explored ideas. And so that's that's why I was interested in this kind of finding people who wanted to talk about um, controversial topics. So what's interesting is that I think John Vervaeke came up with a similar idea and called it Dialogos. I called it Minerval Arts because it seems like our culture has a focus on like martial arts and the spirit of Mars, Ares, and war. Um, and that's an imbalance with some other better um, deity like Minerva, where if you read about Sun Tzu, it's like the best win is the one where there's no blood spilt. That's not the quote out of the book, but that's the idea. And so that's how I imagine like wisdom, like the goddess of wisdom, um, behaving is in ways in which um, the transformation happens without all the suffering. So that's what's at the heart of Minerval Arts. That's why it's called Minerval Arts. And the hope would be that all of the circuses and games and martial arts and MMA and all of that, boxing and all the attention and money that goes into those kinds of things could end up going into other places. Like, and Minerval Arts is one idea for where more attention could go. And because I'm or I was, and probably still am to a degree, shy and an introvert, and my brain is a little bit slow for good reasons, because of my personality. I wanted to create a format that was conducive for my personality and conducive for you know, discovering um, the truth. So, a boxing match might have 10 rounds, and there's a time in between those rounds. And so Minerval Arts could have rounds with time in between those rounds, but there's all these questions about the right format. And my original thought was that um, you want to be able to play with the format and play with the techniques and the rules. And so I can suggest a format with techniques and rules, but that doesn't need to be the one that ends up being most popular. And for me, the goal has turned into um, learning and teaching how to love your enemy. Because when I was on Facebook and suggested an idea, like basically I just expressed my naivety. Like I said, I believe love privilege is the highest form of privilege. I got a lot of people who responded about white privilege and male privilege. Um, so for me, like experiencing being loved and is the most important. It's the my highest form of privilege that I experienced, and I have a lot of reasons for that. But the people were just trying to convince me um, of other kinds of privilege and getting angry um, at me until eventually they started ignoring me. So the goal of Minerval Arts would be, um, I would say the first goal is to understand other perspectives. So it's not an attempt to convert people. That would be the first. Um, and that's difficult to resist. And so I was talking to someone who was tried to explain Dialogos to me. They do it in private and they take a virtue, and this is just one person facilitating Dialogos. So it was private, multiple people. They take a virtue. The first person goes and discusses that virtue for 4 to 5 minutes, and there's supposed to be an assigned listener. And then after the speaker is done, the listener attempts to explain the speaker's perspective. The speaker is, after the listener attempts to reiterate and explain the perspective, the speaker then um, fills in gaps or does supplementation, and and then there's a rotation so that the person who was the listener becomes the speaker and assigns someone else to become the listener. And you go all the way around, and then there can be open conversation once everyone has had a turn. So that's a format for more than one person. And I was interested in formats where there's just two people. Um, so there's an infinite number of formats. What I was interested in is they eventually become public spectacles of some kind. So they can be done in private and practiced in private. There can be schools of Minerval Arts, and eventually you end up with people who have the confidence to represent the school, and as multiple schools come together and agree to the formats. So that, um, like I said, the goal is to learn how to love your enemy. That's like a number one goal. A number two goal is to facilitate error correction. Um, that's not the number one goal. If the participants come out of the Minerval Arts and there was no like updating of knowledge with regard to like the topic or topics, that's okay. But what should emerge out of it is an understanding of the other person's positions. And so ultimately what we're trying to facilitate is this ability to listen, and um, and then, like I would say in my school, there is the focus on loving your enemy and understanding the perspective of your participant or opponent. And um, there's probably a process um, where you uh, as a participant, you request feedback, and so there would be, like, if I were doing it, there would be this, initially there should be a plan that you agree to, like, because the one we tried to do on Twitter, you didn't actually like follow the intent of the plan. So the plan was that there would be an agreement of the rules, and but it seems like you want to do more of a free flow, which I'm cool with that. Like, I want to have participation, so I don't want to be rigid. I want to be flexible. Um, but we would take turns until um, there was some conclusion. Um, a conclusion could be um, instigated by either party to say, I think we're done with this topic. But then I think there should be a final step that would be a retrospective, where there can be lessons learned, where you can say what you think the other person did well and what you think the other person could work on. You can do a retrospective about the process itself, perhaps consider different ways to um, participate in a future um, event, right? So that's what I think about regarding Minerval Arts. And like, I think that skill that is being developed is necessary for peace on earth and for peace. Regarding ignorance policy, weaponized ignorance, I think we just have to be careful about calling it weaponized. Um, I do agree that there can be people who use it like a weapon. The magician can do that for the game they are playing related to power seeking. But there's, like, each participant in that game is seeking power, and um, ultimately, like, people, uh, we're in a society where people are kind of forced to make money, and so there is a form of idolatry that is just um, like, this is related to the idea where you mentioned defend prostitution, or how does prostitution transform? And so I think that's underneath it all, is that ultimately we want to have access to necessities, um, and not be dependent upon money. And I think we can do it. Um, it's a big goal, but until you can provide that safety net that everyone can go to a farm, grow their own food, and have clean water, nutritious food, and safe shelter and clothing, until you can provide that bare, basic necessities, then people will have a fear of losing a supply of food, and this is like an idolatrous food. So some people are doing it for the money, and so they make their money off your attention. And so whether you're a pastor or a source of information in general, um, being dependent on other people's attention can lead you to ignore things that would uh, put your audience at risk. So I think Eric Weinstein called it FU money, but I think, an underlying goal to facilitate um, is a society where people do not fear, um, and will do things for money, do prostitution, is that everyone would have that safety net to have access to clean water, nutritious food, and shelter and clothing. So I think that's the goal.